Revived Thoughts is a production of Revive Studios.
This is Troy and Joel, and you are listening to Revive Thoughts.
We are not to think that we complete our prayer by murmuring a number of syllables, but rather, O brethren, by the purpose of our soul, and in deeds of virtue extending into every action and moment of our life.
Every episode we bring you a different voice from history and a sermon that they delivered. Today we're going way back to the 4th century to listen to a sermon by Basil. Now Troy, tell me, when you... The greenery food that you
Delicious.
put on burritos, do you call that
Burritos?
Basil or do you call that basil?
That's basil.
Okay, so there is a distinction in your head.
Yeah.
I called basil through most of my life until I got peer pressured into calling him Basil instead of basil. But I don't know why.
This is not like an Augustine thing where some people are wrong and they say Augustine when they mean to say Augustine. But technically, you can, if you Google it, your both pronunciations are correct depending on the region you're from. However, in the case of Basil, it is supposed to be Basil, not Basil, which I remember because our very first episode covering Basil, I Googled it because I also thought it was basil because it looks like basil and I've eaten basil. And so in my head, I thought this is his name. It is not. So if you're looking for a delicious topping, you were in the wrong episode, but if you're looking for a sermon from a great pastor of the past, well, then we have good news. Basil is here for you. A couple quick positive responses and an email. Jolene, 5-star on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, by the way. We really appreciate people giving us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. And they do more for us than really anywhere. We appreciate everyone's comments and everything you guys send us, but the 5 stars probably help us the most on Apple Podcasts. And if you're an Android or something like that, don't worry about it. I understand. But I'm just saying which one helps us a lot. Jolene says, wonderful podcast with many exclamation marks. Thank you for this wonderful podcast about church history and old sermons. I love the connections you guys bring us to our brothers and sisters in Christ from long ago. Keep up the great work. Well, Jolene, I'm appreciative. Thank you. We're happy to do it. And thank you so much for listening. And we also got a message. This was from, I believe, Rachel, who said, hi, thank you so much for your podcast and ministry. I thought I heard you announce a book coming this fall winter, but I didn't see anything on your website about it. Is there an official release date? Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to respond to this. Sorry, I know there are a few of you who are waiting for the book. It is being worked on. I have a lot of editor's notes. It takes a while to get through the editor's notes. My apologies on that. It's not ready. Honestly, getting back to Indonesia this summer and everything was a lot busier than I anticipated. And Joel can tell you I often misanticipate how busy I'm going to actually be. I'm a big dreamer. But I am working on it again, so I do hope that I can give you good updates on that soon. But yeah, I apologize if you've been waiting with bated breath. Like you promised this, I like many book author writers before us, am behind on my schedule. So also got an email from Jason who wanted to correct us on some stuff. I'm not going to read the whole email; it was a bit long. But Jason, who has read sermons for us before, I believe is going to be working on a sermon for us again. He wanted to correct some of the things we said about the Methodist movement and wanted to encourage us. The main highlight I will highlight for the show is the UMC, which has many problems he agreed with, is not the only part of the Methodist denomination. And I totally wanted to say I agree with that. Sorry if we've, in the past, when bringing up John Wesley or any of those guys, if we've ever been like, yeah, we'll say kind of like, oh, I believe it was William E. Sangster was a Methodist. And we were like, yeah, you know, Methodists back then are different than today. But he wanted to clarify, like, hey, there's more than just the big, famous liberal branch of Methodists. And you know what? He's right. So my apologies to all of you who are in the branches not related to the big liberal group, and you're kind of like, hey, you're throwing us under the bus. My apologies to all of you.
Okay, ready to jump into Basil?
Yeah, let's do some Basil.
Basil. We've covered Basil before. Basil the Great, as we think of him as he's known, lived in the 4th century, and this is a pretty crazy time in church history. It's really, I feel like when the church is kind of getting its foot, is that how you kind of view it? You know, like we're kind of in turmoil up to this point. There's persecution. It's really, I feel like that 4th century that it starts really kicking it into gear and solidifying into something that's more stable and far-reaching.
Yeah.
Do you think that's actually?
We should do a revived conversation on this. Because, man, some people are like that 300s era is when the church becomes an institution and cultural Christianity kicks in. It's a really
Right.
bad era. And then there are the opposite, where it's like Christianity is finally hitting its heyday. It's finally breaking out of the pits of persecution and able to shine, the light to many people. I'm definitely more the optimist. I'm more in that category of like, hey, after centuries of attack and persecution, and it's able to kind of stand up a little bit more and start cleaning house and start kind of dealing with some of the false teachings that had been intermingled with the church because of the persecution. Yeah, but people often will say, and we've even done an episode, persecution makes the church stronger. People often say, if persecution came, it would clean out the church of all the fake believers. In my experience of studying history and in my experience of going to places where the church is under persecution, actually false teaching slips in really easily because the church can't speak out in public to call it out. And we kind of see in the 4th century, that's where the church is able to start kind of coming down. Like, these are the things that we will unite on. So it's a big shift from where the church was in the 200s and 100s, and the 2nd and 1st century, where you're expected to be persecuted, you're expected to be martyred and fed to lions. We're not seeing that anymore in the 4th century.
Yeah, I always think of it because up until this point, like you're so close to the biblical accounts, you're to the point where you're just now getting away from the point where you can't really like say like, oh, my great grandpa spoke to an apostle or something like that. Like it's just far enough away to where it has to become its own thing. You can't ride off the coattails of the 1st century church. It's becoming its own thing, which has got to be exciting, but also terrifying. And again, we see they went through plenty of hard times. But Basil descends from kind of like what we might almost call like Christian royalty. His family were Christians during the persecution. His mom was the daughter of a martyr that was killed for her faith. His own grandma helped preserve some traditions and writings of a big famous Christian named Gregory of Thaumaturgus. That's my best pronunciation.
Thaumaturgus. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you.
Thaumaturgus.
I didn't look up how to say that one, and it looks like Thaumaturgus, and you know what? People might say, hey, that's wrong. You don't know Gregory of Thaumaturgus. You caught me. I don't. I've never met him.
I can't say I do, yeah. But apparently it was neat to have those writings. His sister became a famous Christian and started her own Christian community. His brother, who you might have heard of, is someone else we've had on the show called Gregory of Nyssa. And he had a younger brother also that followed God and became somewhat of a well-known, prominent believer himself, although not as well-known as Basil.
Which would be kind of rough. You've got 2 older brothers that are called the Cappadocian Fathers. They're these famous church history guys. Everyone knows them. And then you're like the 3rd brother is also, he was kind of an important pastor, but, he just didn't quite get to that level as the other guys.
Hey, I don't think he minded. I think he was A-okay being there.
He probably was, but I'm sure, man, you'd always feel like, and me too, guys, I'm also here.
The Basil brothers, the trio, the triple threat, it's all of us.
Exactly.
He also had a best friend that we've talked about too, Gregory of Nazianzus. So he's rolling in some, shoulder to shoulder with some pretty influential, pretty passionate people. And was one of their instrumental connections in developing the church early on.
Yeah, and he was also pen pals with Athanasius, important Christian at the time as well. And we actually had a sermon by Keith Foskey read it for us earlier this year by Athanasius. So great guy. Keith Foskey is also pretty nice. But the Athanasius is a great sermon, and it's a great story behind it. So go check it out. Now, before all of that, before he became all these famous things, back when they were just young people, he had been sent to Athens to be educated. This is a weird aspect. If you don't know, in history, you would have a child, 14, 16, 17, you would just send them off, kind of like college, but much younger. And one of the places he sent them to was Athens back in the Roman Empire. Athens has always been famous for education and philosophy, and he excelled as a student there. Classic story of the genius kid. Everyone loves him. He became a little too popular, though. He kind of became a little full of himself, it sounds like. His learning kind of led him to living a little bit of a worldly lifestyle. He's outside the house, away from the famous martyr family he's kind of around. Kind of first time the kid's on his own. He doesn't need anybody. He's doing so good in school. Like literally multiple kind of philosopher teachers are trying to take him under his wing, and he's going to be our up and coming prodigy kind of thing. And this has an effect on him. He's feeling very, very full of himself, I guess that's how you'd put it. But when he goes back home, he visits his sister, and his sister has kind of formed this community of people who are living for God. They're super convicted of sin. They've been selling everything they own and trying to live a simple lifestyle. And when he sees his sister and her faith and how much they're just living for Jesus, he feels really convicted about his kind of worldly aspirations and his way he's been doing things. And he and his siblings begin selling what they own and giving it to the poor. And this is a common practice in the Roman Empire, Christianity. One of the ways you showed you were Christian was kind of selling everything you own and giving it to the poor, which, I mean, it does sound Christian. Like that is what Jesus said to do. And, I've never met any Christians who are like, yeah, I sold, a bunch of stuff I own and gave it to the poor. But I do think they might be onto something there. Like, I don't know. He then got into many kind of, as he started living a faithful life, he then began to kind of get into the conflicts of the day. And a lot of them were, as we mentioned, false teaching. And he kind of started going back and forth as a up and coming leader of the church. He had to fight off a lot of different groups. One of the big groups were the Arians, who were people who believed that Jesus was created by God, and they were still very much present in the church during Basil's day.
Yeah, it's really kind of hard for us to kind of wrap our brains around here. But again, we're talking about the early days of the church and kind of the conforming of a lot of these ideas. And it's hard for us to imagine, but Christianity, I say in air quotes because I don't think it literally would have been Christianity, was very close to looking very different. Like the Arian effort was a very real threat, and at times even looked like it was going to be the prominent theology that won this era. And it's just something we don't really think about because history is written by the victors, right? So we have our Nicene Creed that we adhere to. But that's another aspect of this. A lot of people think after the Council of Nicaea got together and we agreed on Jesus 100% God, 100% man, and that all went through, that Arianism kind of died out, but it didn't right away. Like, it took a long time for Arianism to die out. 40 years after the Council of Nicaea, Basil is still, like, that's his number one theological debate that he has to contend with the public. And 20 years after Basil is gone, Ambrose is also still fighting Arianism as well. So this is not something that instantly went away. And so, again, Troy mentioned it, but just to reiterate, Arianism is this idea that Jesus was created by God, is lesser than God. It's not what we would ascribe to being in the Trinity there. There was a lot of tough theology people had to iron out in those earlier days. And this relationship that Basil has with teaching people, theologically guiding people through sound theology, and in a time where there were more other prominent ideas, is what makes up a lot of what Basil was doing through his life. And one hard thing for him was that a bishop that helped lead Basil to God, a childhood bishop. Imagine that trusted childhood pastor that maybe even led you to the Lord. That pastor was now a supporter of Arianism, and this was a huge blow to Basil. It really hurt his feelings, for lack of a better terminology, and it was something that he had to work through his life in this relationship that was now strained with a mentor that he respected a lot, but now had a major theological disagreement with. I love that just kind of humanizing element of him, because I feel like that's something that is so far removed. That's an element that I feel like is kind of, we can kind of relate with that. We can kind of put ourselves in his shoes and see what that must have been like for him. It's a good humanizing detail in his life. Eventually, Basil would become a very prominent leader in his community, leading many places, pastoring many communities. And eventually it does seem like that childhood pastor that Basil had that relationship with did eventually come to realize kind of his error in that theology there. And it does seem like towards the end of their life, their relationship was better again. Again, I don't know. Do you know more details about that, Troy, where that ended up?
It does seem like the bishop kind of got on the right page and figured out he was wrong and got things settled. It looks like at the end of their life they were doing better, but there was definitely, I don't know, imagine, going to the pastor that brought you to Christ, that you had grown up under, and that you had meant so much to you, and having to tell them, hey, you're not understanding Jesus correctly. I think any of us could say that would be that'd be a pretty hard moment. Probably full of a lot of, doubts and definitely emotional. I again, like you said, humanizing. Like I can't imagine how difficult that was.
Yeah, and I also I just find it fascinating. Again, when we do Revive Thoughts, we have that 2020 hindsight. We see the whole picture back to back, and one of the ways that that's helpful is you could just get to see the human element in people. People sometimes they're good intentioned, but they are in error, and it's always, people change over time, and ideally that's for the better. And this seems like an instance where we can kind of see God's truth reign at the end of this interaction there, which is neat to see. But I always try to keep that in mind, interacting with people on a day-to-day basis, because we're so short-sighted currently in the way that we interact with community and the people around us. It's hard for us to realize that people change.
And how many of us would have? Oh, sorry, I was gonna say, how many of us would even have the courage to talk to our pastor, or would would just maybe
you just go away.
Yeah, or say nothing, or maybe just think, well, he knows more than me. I mean, he's the I'm not saying that you are doing that if you're listening right now, but I'm just saying we could see that instinct, and yet I think because Basil took the harder road of confronting him and challenging the man who could look him in the eyes and say, hey, you wouldn't even be a Christian if it weren't for me. I knew you when you were a kid, but through that process, it seems that it led to him back to the faith. So the Lord can use it, and I think a lot of us are scared of those confrontation moments. I've had to go through them. They're not fun, and they don't always end well like this one, but there are times when it is what leads the person back.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that Basil also did was start a hospital, and it was one of his. It seems like a good, successful venture that he set off on. So much so that when the Arian emperor came by to oppose Basil, to call out Basil for what he thought was bad theology, the Arian emperor was so blown away by the hospital that he ended up backing off his attack of Basil. He wanted him to keep up the work that he was doing there, and actually ended up giving him some land to help in that effort. So what a neat example of serving the community in a way that Jesus calls us to, being more powerful than your adversaries. You have an adversary that comes against you, and through mercy and through love, that attack is thwarted, and almost I wouldn't call it an ally made, but a little bit of a goodwill came from it. That's neat to see.
We really covered it on our last episode about Basil, and that story of the emperor coming and the hospital being so amazing he couldn't even stand it. Like, he had to give the guy credit. But it feels like a really living out of the verse where Jesus is like, where your good works are, so the enemies have nothing to say about it. Like, you shame them for trying to, because what are they going to tell the guy running the hospital, taking care of all the sick people, that he's wrong? And that's, I think, what Basil kind of did. But I want to end this episode, kind of this go through of Basil on a different note, kind of keeping with the theme of a more human look at him. When we cover these guys in church history, we often end on their glorious triumphs and victories. And in the past, we had here on our, Revived Thoughts, that kind of made Basil seem like this unstoppable force. And he is. That story with the hospital and the emperor is just so cool. But he is also human. And I found somebody who was kind of sharing an interesting perspective on the end of his life and what he was facing at the end of his life. And this is kind of, you don't know all these names. You're going to hear them and go, I don't know who they are. But listen to what, from the perspective of Basil, he's up against right now. His pen pal, Athanasius, dies in the year 373. And the elder Gregory, I believe this is, dies in 374. These are important leaders of the church who leave gaps that can't be filled. In the same year, 373, him and Gregory of Nazianzus get into a fight over who's supposed to be ruling over what part of a certain area of church territory. And even though these guys have been friends for life, this fight leads to kind of the two of them not being as close anymore. And it's unclear to me when I looked at the research if I think they got kind of, backed on the good side with one another, but it might have been something that happened after Basil died. So again, not fun. There's a bishop who kind of in another city who basically declares himself an enemy of God and an enemy of Basil. So that's hard when you see that happening in the church. Another person is leading a false teaching movement. Apollinaris is, to quote Basil, a cause of sorrow to all the churches with this new heresy that he's kind of introducing in the church at the time. Another person is trying to take Basil down. His name is Eustathius of Sebast, and he's both a traitor to the faith and a personal enemy of Basil, as Basil described him. He's got another guy, a student that he had been leading for a very long time, Eusebius of Samosata. Not the same Eusebius that's famous for church history, not the Pope Eusebius from the 6th century, but a different guy. He was leading up. He was raising this guy to be a disciple that could take on, kind of his Timothy to Basil's Paul here. But he gets banished for standing up for God and some of the truths that he's promoting at the time. And so, there went a lot of Basil's hopes in that guy. His brother Gregory of Nyssa is condemned and deposed, kind of kicked out of the bishop during this time, during this battle with the emperor that he's having over Arianism. When Emperor Valentinian died and the Arians kind of regained strength, Basil must have felt like, great, like no matter how many times we knock the Arians back, that they just keep coming. And at some point you had to wonder, for someone like Basil in the 4th century, not only did the Council of Nicaea seem like it wasn't succeeding against the Arians, you had to wonder if you would actually ever win. Like we know now that they win, that the Trinity view of Christ and God becomes the successful one, but they didn't know that at the time. Basil is becoming very sick. He sees these barbarian armies are starting to make inroads into the empire. The city Antioch is in the middle of a giant church schism. Rome, he's been getting messages from Rome, kind of people are looking for an excuse to banish him. They don't trust him anymore, the church there. He kind of tried to bring a bunch of bishops together as like a unity, kind of like maybe a new council, and they won't come. They're kind of standing away from him. And if he lived just a little longer, he didn't see this, but if he had, he would have seen that the Council of Constantinople, the death of the president of the council, a personal friend of his, and the forced resignation of the second leader of that council, Gregory of Nazianzus, again, former personal friend of his. He didn't see those things because he died shortly before them, but this is not like from Basil. We see these guys as these heroic champions of the faith standing for God. But from Basil's perspective, at the end of his life, he probably was overwhelmed with worries and concerns of all the different ways that the church was under attack, having no idea that his writings, his work would carry on for many centuries and it would last, and that what God was building in the 4th century survived. But he doesn't see the end of that. He dies before it comes to pass. It can be as easy in the prism of history to make it all look like victory after victory with these, revived thoughts champions. But when Basil died, I imagine he might have even been wondering, has all my hard work against the Arians been for nothing? Could there have been more that I did? Thankfully, God used what he did and many others did to keep the faith strong. And here we have a sermon by Basil on prayer, which I imagine was a subject that really helped Basil. How did these guys do the great things they do? Well, one thing that's definitely a part of that is their prayer life.
Prayer is not made perfect by uttering syllables, O brethren, but in the purpose of the soul and in the just actions of a lifetime. Nor are we to believe that God has need of being reminded through our words. We are not to think that we complete our prayer by murmuring a number of syllables, but rather, O brethren, by the purpose of our soul, and in deeds of virtue extending into every action and moment of our life. Neither are we to think that God needs the reminder of our spoken words. Rather, we are to believe that He knows our need, whether we ask of Him or not. The ear of God has no need of our cry, since He can see even from the movements of our soul what it is that we seek for. For have you not heard that Moses was heard by the Lord, though he uttered no sound? But he sought the Lord through the unspoken groanings of the Spirit within him. And the Lord said to him, Why do you cry to me? Exodus 14, verse 15. And let those who do not keep to the straight path, yet who, because of the length of their prayers, consider themselves as virtuous, take heed of these words in Isaiah 1, verse 15. And when you stretch forth your hands, I will turn away my eyes from you, and when you multiply prayer, I will not hear. For the words of prayer that are simply uttered are of themselves of no avail unless they are sent upwards from a fervent soul. For even the Pharisee prayed thus with himself, but not with God. For, given over to the sin of pride, he thought only of himself. Because of this, the Saviour says, "And when you are praying, speak not much, as the heathens do, for they think that in their much speaking they may be heard." Matthew 6, verse 7. And that in the multitude of words there shall not want sin. Proverbs 10, verse 19. This was the cause of God's turning away his eyes when they stretched forth their hands in prayer. For the very symbols of their supplication are the occasion of his resentment. It is as if someone should kill the beloved son of another, and then stretch forth to the afflicted father their hands still stained with blood, asking for the right hand of fellowship. Would not the blood of his son, visible on the hand of his slayer, provoke him rather to just anger? And such are the prayers of the Jews. For when they stretch forth their hands in prayer, they but remind God the Father of their sin against his Son. And at every stretching forth of their hands, they but make manifest that they are stained with the blood of Christ. For they who persevere in their blindness inherit the blood guilt of their fathers. For they cried out, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." Matthew 27, verse 25. 2. Be mindful then of God, O man, and keep the fear of him ever in your heart, and join yourself to all men in communion of prayer. For great indeed is their power to appease God. For as long as we live this life in the flesh, prayer shall be a powerful aid, and as we journey from here, it will be an enduring help on the way to the eternity that awaits us. For as solicitude is a good thing, so likewise to be downcast and despairing, and to doubt of our salvation are things which hurt the soul. Therefore, place your hope in the goodness of God, and look for his aid, knowing that if we truly and sincerely turn to him, not only will he not cast us off forever, but, even as we pray to him, he will say to us, "Here I am." Isaiah 58, verse 9. For who would do an evil action or suffer an evil thought if he believed that God was everywhere, that he is close to those who do such things, and present at every act of ours, and seeing all the counsels of our hearts? Those who answer that they do not see God, or that they do not care what they do, such men, because of this, are but rushing on to an evil state of soul. Peace is the beginning of the purification of the soul, the tongue freed from speaking of the things of men, the eyes no longer dwelling on the beauty of bodies and the elegance of our surroundings, the hearing not undoing the strength of the soul through listening to melodies that were composed for pleasure, nor through the talk of clever and frivolous men, which more than anything else has power to undo the purpose of the soul. For the mind, when not wasted on outward things, or led astray by the world of the senses, turns inward on itself, and through this ascends to the thought of God, and lit by that inward beauty becomes unmindful even of nature, and no more troubled by anxiety for its food, or with concern for clothing. At rest from earth's cares, all its zeal is given to gaining the things that are good forever. 3. Nor should you let the half of your life go without profit to your soul, lost in the insensibility of sleep, but divide the night time between sleep and prayer. And let sleep itself be an act of prayer, for even our sleeping dreams are mostly but echoes of our daytime thoughts. What more blessed than that a man, as soon as the day dawns, should rise and pray and worship his Creator with hymns and songs, and as day begins to brighten, to take up our labours, uniting them everywhere to prayer, and with hymns as with salt, give flavour to our toil. So the solace of hymns brings with it a cheerful and untroubled state of mind. And before eating, let us offer prayer in thanksgiving for the gifts God now gives us, and for those we are yet to receive. And pray likewise when we have eaten, giving thanks for what we have received, and for the gifts that are promised to us. That is sublime prayer, which brings to the soul a clear notion of God. For this is the indwelling of God, through recollection, to have God abiding within you. By this we become a temple of God. As long as this state of recollection is not broken by earthly thoughts, or the mind agitated by unlooked-for emotions, but turning from all things to God, repelling all feelings that lead to desire, and giving itself to those that lead to virtue. And what dawn is to others, let midnight be to the athlete of the service of God. When the night's peace gives most leisure to the soul, and no sights or sounds enter to trouble the heart, then the mind, alone with itself and with God, amends itself in the recollection of its sins, giving itself rules that it may avoid evil, and imploring God's help that it may fulfill all that it desires to do. 4. And this the history of Moses also conveys to us. For the happenings relating to him, which are recorded there, are, as it were, symbols of man's state in this world. For there events did not proceed at an even pace. Now they went well, and now, because of failing strength, the warriors strove with less power. For when Moses held his arms uplifted, Israel overcame. Psalm 28, verse 9. But should his arms drop down, then the Amalek prevailed. This means that when our power of action weakens and falters, then will our ancient enemy prevail against us. But when it is uplifted, and again set upright, our power to see through him becomes stronger. For God uplifts the soul that seeks the things that are above, and lays low the soul that seeks his help to gain the things of the body. He then who comes to the temple of God, let him speak no evil, nor talk of trifling things, nor shameful things. Away with such things! In his temple, as David says, all shall speak his glory. Psalm 28. His angels are present, who shall record the words. The Lord is present, who sees the hearts of those who enter. The prayer of each one is open to the sight of God. The prayer of the man who from his heart or from his understanding is seeking the things of heaven, and the prayer of the one who speaks the words superficially, and as it were, with the edge of his lips, while his heart is far from God. And if he does pray, he is begging for health of body, or for riches, or for the glory of this world. Not of these things should we speak, but, as the Scripture tells us, in his temple all shall speak his glory. But wonder of wonders, the heavens show forth the glory of God. It is the task of the angels to give glory to God. To give glory to the Creator is the whole duty of the entire host of heaven. For every creature, whether it speaks or is silent, whether in heaven or on earth, gives glory to its Maker. We pity the men who hasten from their homes and hurry to the temple, as though to receive something, and there pay no heed to the word of God, and, without any discernment of their own inward life, they neither sorrow at the remembrance of their sins, nor have any fear of the judgment, but, smiling and shaking hands with each other, they turn the house of prayer into a place of endless gossiping, heedless of what the psalmist solemnly tells us. In his temple all speak his glory. But you not alone and do not speak it. You become a distraction to your neighbor, turning his attention to you. God has no need of thy glory, but he desires that you become worthy to receive his glory. And what things a man shall sow, those also shall he reap. 5. We should give thanks to God for the good things he gives us, and not bear it with bad grace that he measures his giving. Should he grant us to be in union with him, this we shall receive as a most perfect and joyful gift. Should he delay this, let us suffer the loss in patience, for he disposes in our lives more perfectly than we could order them. The halcyon is a seabird which nests by the shore, laying its eggs in the sand, and bringing forth its young in the middle of winter, when the sea beats against the land in violent and frequent storms. But during the 7 days while the halcyon broods, for it takes but 7 days to hatch its young, all winds sink to rest, and the sea grows calm. And as it then is in need of food for its young, the most bountiful God grants this little creature another 7 days of calm, that it may feed its young. Since all sailors know of this, they give this time the name of the halcyon days. These things are ordered by the providence of God for the creatures that are without reason, that you may be led to seek of God the things that you need for your salvation. And when for this small bird he holds back the great and fearful sea, and bids it calm in winter, what will he not do for you, made in his own image? And if he should so tenderly cherish the halcyon, how much more will he not give you, when you call upon him with all your heart? Let us then be resolved, brethren, that as in our other needs, so also in time of temptation, not to count on human expectations or seek help there, but let us send upwards our entreaties, and with sighs and tears, with earnest prayer, with long watching. And in this manner shall we obtain deliverance from our affliction, rejecting human help as vain, and keeping a firm hope in him who alone has power to save us. To him let us offer glory and adoration, together with the eternal Father and the life-giving Spirit, now and forever, world without end. Amen.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Revived Thoughts. Today's sermon was narrated by Richard Roodt. Big thanks to Richard for helping us once again with another Revived Thoughts episode.
Yeah, Richard actually sent an email, found these sermons on his own, enjoyed our earlier episodes by Basil. I think maybe was inspired by the guy. He's a great guy. And sent us a message like, hey, I've got some sermons for you on him. He's actually read another one that we're going to release out there as I think just probably a free extra listen that we'll put out on the feed at some point. So thank you, Richard, so much for that. If you are listening to the show and you also want to bring a sermon to life, we would love to have you. We love the passion and the speakers. We have several speakers who they come back over and over again because they've just really appreciated how much these sermons have had a huge impact on their life. I am impacted editing these sermons. I learned so much about preaching and just how to follow God from working on them on my end. And then we have these speakers who are like, hey, I learned so much by reading the sermon. Thank you so much. And if you want to be a part of that process, we have speakers all around the world, but we always can use fresh and new voices to add to the mix. So reach out to us and let's see if we can have you on too. This is Troy and Joel, and this is Revive Thoughts.